Hi, I'm Dan and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 39. I'm changing things up from what I stated in the first Smackdown video of the 1920s. I'm breaking the series up into 9 videos instead of 4. They were just going to get too long and I didn't want you folks to get even more bored. Seriously, I just kept on uncovering stories and each decade deserves its own video. Special bonus is that I'm going to try mind you, to put these videos out weekly through January 12th, 2024. Hopefully I can make it, and I'll let you know if there are any delays, so stay tuned. All right, enough housekeeping. On with USA versus Canada versus Mexico, the Currency Smackdown 1930s. In the first Smackdown, the USA took home the trophy for best overall currency for the 1920s, which was a decade of change for all 3 countries. A quick note if you're tuning in for the first time, when I started my own world banknote collection in 2020, I noticed a pattern that dated back more than a century, and how the United States, Canada, and Mexico, their currency design changes all aligned at roughly the same time, give or take a few years. So basically, this video series is an entire sidebar of my world banknote collection. Numismatic disclaimer, please note that I'm not an expert in Mexican and Canadian currency, or for that matter, US currency. I'm just a currency collector who likes to uncover the stories behind the banknotes. Like the 1920s, the 1930s was a decade of change for currency for all 3 countries. For ease of reference and to provide a time frame, I've divided up the currency changes into what I'm calling decades, knowing that the timeline doesn't exactly align. Because there are at least 7 or more denominations for each of the 3 countries, I'm only highlighting the lowest 3 denominations issued for each decade period. I'll do my best to highlight who and or what is depicted, design, items of interest, colors, security features, differentiations, show currency from my collection, and maybe a few stories. For each decade segment, I'll start with Canada first, followed by Mexico, and then the United States. I will apologize in advance for using images. Budget and what I want in my collection both have restraints, so I will be using photos for banknotes. The 1930s decade saw many changes for all 3 countries. Canada, Mexico, and the US all saw the size of currency reduced along with significant design changes. For one country, that meant 3 different 1 denominations being issued within a single 12-month time period. By the late 1930s, the design of all 3 countries' currency would, for all intents and purposes, remain the same for the next 30 to 60 years. All right, let's get going with our neighbors to the north, Canada. The 1930s saw 2 big changes in currency in Canada with the establishment of a central bank. In July 1933, the government set up a commission to study previous financial acts and to consider the establishment of a central bank for Canada. Following the commission's recommendation, the Bank of Canada Act received royal assessment in July of 1934, and the central bank officially started operations on March 11, 1935. Banknotes were no longer issued by the Dominion of Canada, but now the Bank of Canada. The second of the big change was the reduction of currency size, which coincided with the new central bank. Banknotes were reduced in size, similar to the US, by about 30% with the new issues of 1935. What's very unique about the 1935 issue was that they were printed in English and French because Canada is a bilingual nation. Another detail is that 2 different companies printed the currency. The British American Banknote Company printed the $2, $5, and $10 notes, while the Canadian Banknote Company made the remaining denominations. The 1935 issue features members of the British royal family on the 1 through 100 denominations, and the 500 and 1000 have former Canadian prime ministers. The new small-size 1935 issue would also begin setting a specific color for each denomination. This continues to this day, but there were a few color changes. Full transparency here with Canada. I'm completely bending the timeline to meet my decades comparison because, it's my video. Canada had a major currency redesign in 1937. I'm moving the 1937 issue to the 40s as it was the only currency designed to circulate during the decade of World War II. So, on to the first currency issues from the Bank of Canada. With the new 1935 issues, the main portrait was moved to the left and King George V remains on the one. He reigned from 1910 to 1936 and is King Charles III's great-grandfather. In the center, the green base color note is a large, highly detailed, decorative denomination, followed by the new Bank of Canada seal on the center left. The green reverse features the seated allegorical figure of agriculture holding various farming tools with a stalk of wheat to the left and a cornucopia to the right. On a design note, the use of Canadian maple leaves incorporated into the border work is really cool. You'll see the maple leaf detail worked into motifs on about half the notes. The blue 1935 too has King George V's wife, Queen Consort Mary of Teck. She was previously on the 1923 Dominion of Canada $5 note. All of the 1935 issues keep the same design features with the portrait on the left, denomination in the center, and the seal on the right. The striking blue reverse, again I have to love the bold blue ink, depicts Mercury, the Roman god of commerce, transporter of goods, communication, and travelers. A cool vignette that he's surrounded by ships, a plane, and trains. But oddly, no automobile. The orange 5 displays Edward, the Prince of Wales, the soon-to-be King Edward VIII in 1936 and who abdicated the throne the same year for a twice-divorced American woman. Note the microprinting as the background for the signature areas that intertwines text and numerals. The brilliant orange reverse features the allegorical figure Electrical Power. This is a rather odd but artistically impressive illustration of a naked figure who's sitting on a hydroelectric power plant building holding a giant sledgehammer with a dam and a mountain scene in the background. And I'm just going to say, that's kind of strange. The remaining denominations of the 1935 issue was the purple 10 with the portrait of Princess Mary, the only daughter of King George V and Queen Mary. The back has the allegorical vignette of a seated female representing harvest. The rose-colored 20 has the portrait of 8-year-old Princess Elizabeth. Yes, the recently departed Queen Elizabeth II. She was even popular back before she was the heir apparent to the throne. In 1935, she would have been a minor royal and like 18th in line for the throne of England, if Edward VIII, their uncle, had children, and, oh yeah, didn't abdicate the throne. Details, details. The reverse has the second vignette of agriculture with a kneeling male showing off his produce. I'm just not going to say any more. The Royal Purple 25 was a commemorative note issued to celebrate the Silver Jubilee of King George V's reign. The note is actually dated May 6th, the anniversary of the day George became king in 1910. I've said it before, but Canadians, you're just so thoughtful. The reverse departs from the allegorical scenes with an illustration of Windsor Castle located in England's county of Berkshire. I think that's just a little bizarre. I mean, why would any country ever issue a commemorative banknote? Certainly not the U.S. The 1935 Tan 50 has the portrait of Prince Albert, the Duke of York, who would become King George VI at the end of 1936 when his older brother Edward dumped the crown for the American woman, and yep, I'm beating the dead horse. George VI is King Charles II's grandfather. The theme for the reverse is modern innovations featuring a seated female speaking into a microphone. Now, this allegory is quite ironic if you've seen the movie The King's Speech, where Prince Albert had a terrible stutter and abhorred public speaking.
For His Majesty, the King.
Well, it all turned out well in the end. On the brown front of the 1935 100 is the third son of King George V and Queen Mary, Prince Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, who was the 11th Governor-General of Australia at the end of World War II. The reverse has the allegory of commerce and industry with a male showing a transatlantic steamer to a child in front of manufacturing buildings and a shipyard in the background. The large amount denomination notes of 1935 started the tradition of honoring former Canadian prime ministers on the front. The light brown 500 has the portrait of Sir John Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, who served 2 separate terms from 1867 to 1891. This is the last $500 bill issued by Canada. The reverse allegorical figure represents fertility, and as you can see, fertility just might not represent a good harvest, and I'll say no more. The olive green 1000 has the image of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, Prime Minister from 1896 to 1911, who, depending on the list, is ranked as Canada's best PM. The reverse allegory depicts protection, with a kneeling woman shielding a child with an unsheathed sword in her right hand while clasping a shield in her left. That completes the 1935 issue from the Bank of Canada. Remember, what makes this issue so unique is that all of the banknotes were printed with English and French versions. The French language Bank of Canada notes are much rarer and more valuable than the English. The 1935 issue did incorporate a security device. Just like the U.S., who used red and blue silk threads, Canada used small dots called planchets scattered randomly into their paper. This was used along with the detailed fine lines and what I would call micro-printing in the signature area background to prevent counterfeiting. On to Mexico. The first series of banknotes issued by the bank in Mexico began in the late 1920s, and yep, I'm cheating the timeline again. The Bank of Mexico probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for then President, and you know what, I'm not even going to say his name, we'll just dub it in. Plutarco Elias Calles. He was the first president to appear on the cover of Time magazine in 1924. He was the 4th head of state post the signing of the Mexican Constitution of 1917. Man, where's Joe from the coin box when you need him? The notes began to appear in the late 1920s and were issued until 1934 and were large size, measuring 180 by 83 millimeters, or roughly 7 inches wide by 3 1/4 inches high. And timeline bending spoiler alert, after 1936, Mexico did reduce their currency in size, but I'm saving that for the 1940s. The notes were designed and printed with direction and input from the Bank of Mexico by the American Banknote Company, with most of the vignettes being selected from the company's catalogs. Mexico starts with the 5 pesos because they didn't issue a 1 peso until 1936. The 5 peso center portrait by the American Banknote Company is officially called the ideal head of an Algerian girl. Now that's a bizarre name. Nefarious rumors surround the note, or rather the identity of the woman of the portrait, and it involved the Mexican Minister of Finance and even the President, Plutarco Elias Calles. The woman is believed to be Gloria Faure, who was a Catalonian performing artist, whatever that is, around Mexico in 1925. The note took on the nickname La Gitana, or the Gypsy Note. To save some time, I'm going to go through all the fronts of the notes first because the reverse of the series are all very, very similar. The 10 pesos imagery is just a bit more traditional with no scandalous rumors attached. The center is an allegorical vignette of 2 floating angels holding up the Book of Law. The American Banknote Company did an outstanding job with colors for this entire series. Zooming in on the 10 denomination, look at the use of the colors. Brown, green, blue, and orange, all placed and printed perfectly. The entire 1925 to 1936 series uses this color palette. Kudos to the American Banknote Company and the Bank of Mexico for issuing these notes. This may be my favorite note, or at least my favorite vignette for this video. The 20 pesos features the engraving of a train being unloaded at a pier next to an ocean liner. The locomotive is a bit dated for the era, but this accurately depicts how people and goods were transported around the world. It's kind of sad that this vignette was replaced after 1936. The 50 pesos depicts Liberty seated on the left holding a sailing ship. The 100 pesos has a male allegorical figure showing a steamship to a child while seated on what appears to be a dock with rope and propeller beside them. And if you've been paying attention, you've seen this vignette before. It was also used on the $100 1935 Canadian reverse. Canada lost the rope and the propeller, so I guess it's different. The American banknote and Canadian banknote companies? What? You just ran out of ideas for allegorical vignette ideas? But not to worry, Mexico replaced this in 1936. You'll see something similar coming up, so pay attention. The 500 pesos has a seated female figure holding a sparking wire of electricity with a hydroelectric powerhouse on her left and a manufacturing plant on the right. The 1,000 pesos has the center vignette of a seated female figure. Does anybody stand up in this currency series? Anyways, with her right hand on a winged wheel, which is one of the many symbols associated with the Roman god Hermes, who is also the god of commerce and trade, remember the caduceus. But much more importantly, it's the logo of the Detroit Red Wings hockey team, whom I hate. Hey, it's hockey, and I'm from Minnesota, and I bet the Canadians watching this get it. Back to the 1,000 pesos. The female figure is also pondering over a globe. About what, I have no idea. This is a beautiful engraving that was also used by a private Canadian banknote that you saw in Part 1, the 1920s. Weird how that worked out, isn't it? All of the reverse sides of the 1925 to 1936 series have the Statue of Victory or the Angel of Independence in the center. Built in 1910, located in downtown Mexico City, it commemorates a century of independence from Spain when it was built in 1810. The monument is 118 feet high or 36 meters. The column has been featured on the reverse of Mexican bullion Libertad since 1990 and several other coins. What remains consistent is the beautiful and detailed lathe work. They all have a different pattern. It's like a spirograph on steroids. What's unique about each reverse is the color, border design, and the placement of the text Bank of Mexico, starting with the dark green 5 pesos, the brown 10, the 20 has a red reverse, the 50 pesos olive green, the 100 reverse has a brighter green. My favorite, of course, is the 500 blue, and finishing up with the orange reverse 1,000 pesos. Besides the overall detail engraving, there are 2 other visible security features used, and both are the same ones used for the Canadian 1935 issues. There is the randomly scattered dot planchets and the fine print background of the signature area. They are the same because they were designed by what I would call sister companies. The American Banknote Company and the Canadian Banknote Company were part of the same company until 1925. But as you can see, comparing the Canadian note, the 2 companies obviously shared the same features. It's all semantics because they are still great notes, especially because they're the large size too. Values for these notes aren't sky high, they're just hard to find, and many are proof and specimens. I couldn't find any of the high pesos amount denominations, so there's that. On to the U.S. notes. For the U.S., the 1930s represented the transition from large size to the new and improved small size currency, Series 1928, released in July of 1929. The result of this small change was that basically the overall design of U.S. notes would go unchanged for the next 7 decades. The 1930s still had a large multi-personality disorder continuing to circulate 6 different types of currency. Silver certificates, legal tender notes, Federal Reserve notes, gold certificates, Federal Reserve banks, and national bank notes. That went down to 5 on April 5, 1933, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, removing the dollar from the gold standard and outlawing the ownership of gold in any form, including paper gold certificates, which, by the way, had greenbacks. But they came back in 1934, only this time with the super cool old school goldfish orange reverse color. Not that anybody saw them because it was illegal for them to circulate outside of the Federal Reserve bank system. So we're doing this again. Circulating in the 1930s, there were at least 4 $1 bills with 2 different reverses, 1 $2 bill, 5 different 5s, 5 10 banknotes, 4 20s, 4 50s, 4 hundreds, and 2 of each of the $500, $1,000, $5,000, and $10,000 bills. That would be a total of 40 unique small-sized denominations, all possibly circulating at the same time. Now that's governmental bureaucratic efficiency at its best. And if you want to get technical, I'm not addressing the Federal Reserve seal design changes, financial obligation changes, dark green versus light green seal for Federal Reserve notes, and a slew of other minor changes that all took place during the 1930s. But all those notes and changes do make for good collecting. The first U.S. small-sized $1 bill was the Series 1928 Silver Certificate. The important factor about these notes is that legislation required an actual silver dollar coin to be held in the U.S. Treasury, as it clearly states under the first President George Washington's portrait, reading, "1 silver dollar payable to the bearer on demand." The blue U.S. Treasury seal is the hallmark of this note, but is somewhat balanced by the large gray text denomination on the right. More on the reverse in a bit. The second $1 note was the Series 1928 United States note or legal tender note. This note is one of my favorite small-size banknotes with that bright red seal and serial numbers. This particular note has a crazy story and were printed for only 2 months in April and May of 1933, yet are dated Series 1928. I'm not going deep here, but if you want to learn more, check out my video, Legal Tender Mysteries, see the link in the description below. The first print run design is almost identical to the 1928 Silver Certificate, with the exception of the note type and legal obligations. The third $1 bill is the series of 1934, which underwent what I'll call an interior face design change. The first print exterior border remained basically the same as Series 1928. Well, if you really want to get picky, the acanthus leaf detail that surrounds the lower denomination did change. But the Treasury seal was moved to the right, overprinted onto the large 1. Added to the left side was a bold blue numerical 1 on top of the now very shortened financial obligation. The reason for the changes? Legislation was passed in 1933 that freed the Treasury backing silver certificates with an actual silver dollar coin, and it allowed it to redeem silver certificates with bullion or silver granules or whatever they had that was silver laying around. Under Washington's portrait, the financial obligation changed accordingly, reading $1 in silver, payable to the bearer on demand. Finally, we address the reverse of the Series 1928 and 1934 $1 bills, which all had the same outside border reverse carried over from the large-size Series 1923 Silver Certificate. The center cogwheel design was replaced with a large 1 and $1 graphic. This reverse became known as the funny back after a few years because the Series 1935 had the reverse design still used today, so folks got used to seeing the new design, and when they came across the Series 1928 or 34, the back looked, well, funny. Because you need to print and issue 4 different $1 notes in a period of 2 years, the Series 1935 was introduced with a design that remained in production until 1964. The notes represented an important innovation for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They were the first small-sized notes that overprinted the signatures of the Secretary of the Treasury and the U.S. Treasurer. Prior to the 1935 series, the signatures were engraved on the printing plates. Creating new plates is a timely process, and overprinting the signatures reduced production and turnaround time greatly whenever a new secretary was appointed. The Series 1935 Silver Certificate border remained the same, but the blue seal was reduced in size by 33%. The large gray 1 was removed and replaced with $1 below the upper right serial number. Sadly, the large blue 1 was turned to gray and also reduced in size. None of the legal text was changed, but there were numerous other minor changes that all added up for the Series 1935 to be noticeably visually different. I just wish they would have kept the large blue 1 on the left side. A new reverse also came along with the $1 Series 1935 Silver Certificate. Upon hearing there would be a redesign, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the opportunity to make some suggestions. Well, we all know they weren't suggestions. It was his idea to place the two-sided Great Seal of the United States on the new reverse. Designs were made, and when the first draft came back from the Treasury, the obverse eagle side was on the left of the bill. He originally signed off on the first version, but as you can see, his signature has been scratched off. Roosevelt thought that the order should be reversed so that the phrase "of the United States" would be under the obverse side of the seal. If you didn't notice, the text Great Seal of the United States of America was not on the initial proof at all. The final proof or revised model bears his approval signature under the date. I'm not going any deeper on the reverse. Yes, there are 13 things depicted 13 times, and there's all the conspiracy theory stuff. Nope, I'm just not going there. Alrighty then, we just spent 3 hours on the $1 bill. Let's move on to the 2. The Series 1928 $2 legal tender kept the portrait of the third president, Thomas Jefferson. An interesting sidebar here that I've mentioned before is Jefferson almost didn't make it. According to the book, The BEP, First 100 Years, James Garfield, the 20th president, was first suggested for the new $2 note because of the sentiment for assassinated presidents, and also because, quote, his flowing beard would offer a marked contrast to the clean-shaven features of Washington. But it never happened. The reverse of the 2 has a wonderfully engraved vignette of Thomas Jefferson's home Monticello located in north-central Virginia. The new small-size 5s of 1928 and 1929 has 3 options to choose from, and I'm going with the Federal Reserve note as it was by far the most issued $5 bill. The 5 bears the image of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, using the same portrait from the 1923 $5 silver certificate. What you're seeing is the Series 1928 that contains the verbiage in gold or lawful money in the financial obligation. Up until 1933, Federal Reserve notes were backed by 40% gold. That was the initial requirement when FRNs were created by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. That all changed with the Gold Act of 1934. For more on that, see the link in the description below to my video Small Size Gold Certificates. Sidebar here. What makes me scratch my head is that folks go around stating that the government has to give you gold for this note. Well, yeah, at the time you actually got changed when you used cash. I know, pretty weird. Even more bizarre, you could get change at a bank. How about a couple of 250 half eagles? You can get 5 silver dollars or a roll of silver dimes, whatever floated your boat back then. They were circulating coins. End of sidebar. The reverse of the 5 is the Lincoln Memorial that was completed in 1922, becoming one of the most iconic sites for Americans. The neoclassical structure stands at the western end of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The building has been the place of many iconic moments over the past 100 years. Of the 6 currency types, only the Federal Reserve notes issued 9 denominations, so we're going with them to show the rest of the denominations. The 10 has the founding father and the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. The 20 still has the portrait of Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. The 50 depicts Ulysses S. Grant, our 18th President. The 100 has the illustration of Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers. The $500 bill has William McKinley, the 24th president, who was assassinated in 1901. The $1,000 bill has Grover Cleveland, who was the only U.S. president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. James Madison, the 4th president of the United States, is on the $5,000 bill. His wife, Dolly Madison, may be more famous for her confectionery snack cakes that kept half the army fed in the War of 1812. Well, okay, that's a load of crap, but they are delicious on a road trip. And finally, there's Salmon, S-A-L-M-O-N, P. Chase, the 25th Secretary of the Treasury and 6th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's on the 10,000, which is the largest denomination to legally circulate for paper currency ever issued by the U.S. Checking out the reverse side for the rest of the notes. The 10 has the U.S.Treasury building, and everybody loves the automobile. The 20 has the White House before Harry Truman added the balcony. The 50 displays the U.S. Capitol, and this is one of my favorite vignettes. The 100 depicts the front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here's where things get boring. The highest denominations only have decorative dollar amounts, both numerical and spelled out along with the United States of America. That's pretty lame. No more buildings. I mean, there had to be something. How about the BEP, the Smithsonian, the Washington Monument, or Mount Vernon? Anything. I mean, it took me like 10 minutes to Photoshop these. There you have it. That completes what Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. issued for circulating currency during the 1930s. Who will take home the Smackdown gold for the 1930s? Is it Canada, Mexico, or the United States? The winner is Mexico! I had to go with Mexico because their first issue of currency from the Bank of Mexico, it's awesome. The use of the rainbow type coloring pattern and then the highly detailed coloring used for the front sides really does separate them from the rest. Canada was a close second with all those allegorical vignettes on the backs. Well, do you agree? Let me know your Smackdown opinion in the comments. That's it for video number 39. Up next is the 1940s. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really do appreciate your time. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and thank you very much for checking in.